Amen. Our sermon reading, if you were here last week, is going to look really familiar because it's the exact same passage from last week. Matthew 28:19, and here's what Matthew writes for us. Therefore, go, make disciples of all nations or of all people. And that's our focus again, this idea of God's mission. And last week, as we began this whole idea of looking at this mission that God has given us, and it's been termed the Great Commission that Jesus got. I mean, this is some of Jesus' very last words that he speaks to his followers and says, here's this thing, and we call it the Great Commission of making disciples of Jesus for the transformation of lives so that we can have the transformation of the world. And it's interesting because this week I got a report back from Barna Church Survey. And Barna is a person who's kind of statistician. He does this a lot of research and that kind of things. And here's his conclusion. This was interesting. They asked churchgoers, how many of you have heard of this thing called the Great Commission? Jesus' final words to his church. 51% said, never heard it. 25% said, yeah, but I can't recall really what it means. 6% said, I'm not even sure. 17% said, yes, this is what it is, and I can recite this thing to you. Wow. The conclusion was amazing for Barna. He said this, all the church growth strategies you can throw out there cannot compensate for the absence of authentic sharing of the good news and inviting people to know Jesus. It's there. It's what it is. It's an amazing thing. See, last week we talked about, I guess I would say some of my main points was we talked about the shift of emphasis that needs to take place that we haven't had to do in a long time in the church in America. And that shift of emphasis is putting things back to an idea of outreach and sharing and invitation of bringing people to the church. And then we also talked a little bit about our very own commitment of being a disciple of Jesus, because you can't make disciples if you're not a disciple first. And then we talked about this idea of the church culture. Just like Barna said, the church culture is always going to be stronger than any strategy you try to throw out there. And last week, the phrase I believe I used was, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And that was an amazing thing. But here's what I say about this idea of having a church culture, a culture of love, a culture of invitation toward people. They asked and did a big research and found, how do people start attending church? This is eye-opening, folks. Advertising, this is universal. Advertising, you send out 100 flyers, you're going to get 1% to 2% respond to it. That's just universal. 2% from advertising. Invited by the pastor, we try to do our best. Kathy and I, everywhere we go, normally when we're at restaurants or wherever we are, we try to get to know the wait staff and everybody else, and we just invite them. We've invited people. We've invited our waitresses and waiters to churches, and they've come and become a part of the church and actually became members. It just happens as you talk with people and get to know them. Organized visits. We're all going to get out there and we're going to visit some people out in the community. 6%. That's not bad. A friend invited me. And this, I've seen this numerous times, and it's always 85 to 90% of people show up to church. Why? They were invited by a friend. Does everybody get a hold of this? You see, this is the church culture I'm talking about. If we look around here and say, well, preacher, I don't know, but whatever, you need to start putting some strategies together so we can grow a church, it's going to fail because this is where it begins, right here. Us. We all share. We live. We share Jesus as best we possibly can to carry out this great commission. Now, in the first service, I talked about this thing called Bar Rescue. It used to be on Spike TV. I don't know what they call it now. Anybody here ever seen Bar Rescue before? Hey, a few. In the first service, 0 had seen Bar Rescue, and I said, great, the pastor's the only one watching how to rescue a bar. But here, at least, there's a few people with me in this. Bar Rescue is an amazing show, and I watch it, and I think this should be for the church. They should have a thing called church rescue all the time. And what this is these are bars, because it's this guy's specialty. John Taffer comes in, and they're failing. They're not making it. They're way in debt. They're going to close the doors usually within a month or so. And he comes in, and they say, okay, just come do this for us. But he doesn't come in and say, here's all these great strategies, start putting them together. He spends most of his time changing the culture of the group. What needs to change here? What's going on that's making this happen? And as the culture changes, then he says, now here are some strategies. And every time that they listen to him, it works. It works. So I said, maybe when I retire, I'm going to start church rescue and maybe try some of that and see if that happens. I don't know if anybody wants to help me with that. I don't know. See, Jesus has given us one imperative. Now, by an imperative, of course, that is make disciples of all people. An imperative is a command. It's not a suggestion. Jesus didn't go out and say, well, I'm suggesting maybe you try this. He didn't go out and say, if you can fit this into your busy schedule, maybe do this sometimes. He didn't come out and say, well, if you're feeling up to it this month, maybe put a little effort into it. He says, this is the one reason the church exists, right here. This is your purpose. Make it happen. Make it happen. Now we know that this one main clause, this one imperative is surrounded by three dependent clauses. And we look at those, and those are going, those are baptizing, and those are teaching. This is the ways we do these things so that we can make disciples. The Greek the original language is a very descriptive, beautiful language. Like the Greek has 4 words that we really use for the word love, where we have one word, love. It's just more descriptive. It's a very powerful language. And in the same way, the word go, interestingly enough, can mean different things. One word that for go could focus on a focus on the destination of where you're going. Another word for go can be like how you get there. But this word that Matthew uses 4 times in this chapter for go has this idea of purpose and motivation of why you go. Why would you do this thing? To go. So it's not just a chapter of go that Matthew gives us, but it's a chapter of go with purpose. This is the thing that drives you and motivates you with a compulsion to make this thing happen. So in verse 19, Jesus says, you will make disciples by going with purpose. And I think what Jesus is trying to tell us is, I don't think I need to stand up here and give you some motivational speech about why you should go or what you should do. Your lives have been transformed. I know you're going to step out. You're going to reach out. You're going to go to people. You're going to share the good news. You're going to live the good news because you're compelled by my love. You've been compelled by my life. You're compelled by your love for me, your love for others in this transformed life, and you are going to go. Go. Like last week, here's the passage what we just had read today. Remember what happened? Jesus heals somebody. He says, now don't tell anybody about this. I'm not ready to share with everybody I'm the Messiah yet. Just keep it quiet. So what did he do? He couldn't help himself. What does he do? He runs to everybody and blabs it. Man, Jesus healed me. This is so good. So much that Jesus couldn't even go to a town. He had to stay on the outskirts because he was so famous all of a sudden. And he didn't want it that quickly, that famous part of what they were looking for. But it happened because people couldn't help themselves. They had a compulsion to go and share what Jesus did in their lives. Everybody getting hold of this? I'm hoping. What we talked about last week. Andrew meets Jesus. Woo! Changes his life. He runs to his brother Simon Peter, says, I met the Messiah. You've got to come meet Jesus. He can change your life. That's what it's about. The woman at the well, Jesus offers her, she's a mess. Jesus offers her living water, and what happens? Her life is changed, and she runs and tells everybody, you've got to meet this Jesus. He can change your life, and they all run out there to meet him. It reminds me of a song by a group called Skillet called Famous. We want to make God famous. He says, I testify. This isn't a secret meant to keep. Your love like fire spreads from my heart straight to my feet. You know what he's talking about there? This powerful love right here, whoom, right to my feet, because I got to go and tell people about this. And why? Because when I was dead, you gave me new life. And I'm lifting you up with all my might. I'm unashamed. I'm wide awake. I'm not going to hide. I can't deny you are my everything. And so he cries out, with all my heart and life, I'm going to live loud. I want to make you famous. I want to light up the night, let it shine, burning, never burning out. I want to make you famous. Could we, if we had a church, and in a church in America, could once again get to this place and have a culture where we feel this way, we would change our nation for the better in so many ways for so many people who need to know Jesus. Purpose. I believe by God's design, there's purpose in this world. The very definition of purpose is this: the reason for which something is created or exists. Everybody get that? The reason for which something is created or exists. Purpose is the one thing that should drive, that should motivate something to accomplish what has been created to be, what has been created to do. And the Church of Jesus is no different. We have a purpose: making disciples of Jesus for the transformation of lives in the world. We're going to do it by growing with purpose. We're going to do it by baptizing. We're going to do it by teaching, which we'll get into in the next couple of weeks. You don't want to miss those and how important that is as well. Because this is why the church exists. 20 years ago, I read a book, interesting book, called The Purpose-Driven Church, Rick Warren. And it just clicked for me. I was like, yes. You see, this is the one thing that should drive every church. It's their purpose, the purpose that Jesus has given us, making disciples. It should drive everything about us. But far too often in our lives and in our churches and in organizations and whatever it is, we end up being driven by other things. Other things motivate us. They motivate our decision making. They motivate our activity that we carry out. So I thought, okay, let's take a look at our lives, our churches, organizations, and see what are the other things that motivate and cause us to do the things that we do. One of those things is, I believe this wholeheartedly, fear. Fear motivates. People and organizations are often motivated by fear. They're driven by fear in their decision making, in all their activity. We got to play it safe. We got to avoid risks. We got to keep the status quo. We can't focus on what is different. We can't focus on what's new, what's the unknown out there. You know, research is so clear. I'm not going to sit here and waste your time with it, but research is so clear that, man, I can't believe it. But people and organizations will cling to what is unsatisfactory and dysfunctional out of fear of what they need to do to make a change. You've seen it in lives, you've seen it in organizations, you know about it. The same thing can happen. Fear is powerful. But fear is not the thing that should motivate us and drive a church or our lives, really. Please don't let fear determine your life and where you're going. It is not designed to be that. Our lives were never designed to be driven by fear, but by purpose of who God has made us to be who we are called to be. Don't let our church be driven by fear, because that is not the right thing. We are called to a purpose, and we've been created and we exist for that purpose, and that is what should drive us every time. The past. The past is powerful too. People and organizations are often driven by their past, whether it's good or whether it's bad. The things of the past still dictate how we behave, how we think, all of our activity. Folks, I want you to remember this. I've said this numerous times. I'm going to continue to say it. Is everybody listening? We are products of our past. We cannot change that. But the past does not have to dictate who we are or who we will be. All right? Remember that. You can't navigate life while you're looking in a rearview mirror the whole time, because God doesn't live in the past. It's so true. God doesn't live in the past. He lives in the present, and He's leading us with purpose into our designed future. And if we're constantly in the past, we're not where God is or wants us to be, but He's saying, this is where I want to take you, and this is the purpose that drives us if we do it. I know. Many people, many churches were driven by past, emotional junk that's there, spiritual junk that's there, things that we've done, things done to us. If things been done to us, man, come find healing. You know, come out and just find healing in the midst of that. Maybe it's the traditions, maybe it's the glory days, maybe it's the horrible days. We don't know. But the past was never designed to lead us. And the last one I think is interesting is comfort. That looks pretty good right now, doesn't it? Some of you are doing that right now. Peace and comfort are found in God's presence as we live and be who we were designed to be. People and organizations are often driven by what is safe and comfortable. So I was thinking about this today. I was thinking about one of my favorite movies, really, but you can never show a clip because the language in it was so. And the movie of course, is Shawshank Redemption. Anybody seen Shawshank Redemption? Probably most of us have. And a bunch of people who are incarcerated in a place called Shawshank, and the different things that take place in people's lives. But one of my favorite quotes out of that is just so telling. Comes from Red. Okay, Red. He's there, and he says, "These walls are kind of funny. The walls that keep you in of the prison. First, you hate them. Then you get used to them. Enough time passes, it gets so you depend upon them. That's institutionalized." And I get so, I think, oh man, the walls, at first when they confine you in, it's like, oh, you hate them, and then you kind of get used to them, and then pretty soon you're like, oh, these are good things, you know. I depend upon these walls to keep me safe and comfortable from this. But we've never been called to comfort, folks. We have always been called to go with purpose and do what God calls us to do. Yes, we serve the God of all comfort, the Scripture calls God. But we've never been called to a comfortable life. God just doesn't say, I want you to, my most important thing I want for you is to be comfortable. God never says that. God says, my most important thing to you is to change your life and transform you and to carry out the mission I've given you and designed you to be. Comfort. Peace and comfort are found in God's presence as we live and be who we were designed to be. See, the church or your life or anything else can't be driven by comfort. Remember the early church? I mean, they transformed the world. But it wasn't through seeking to be comfortable or safe. It was going with a purpose. They were persecuted. They were beaten. They were chased down. They were martyred. Not finding comfort, burdened with a purpose to go and do what they were called to do. Today, the church is on fire in China, in the Middle East, in Iran. How is this happening? Because it's under severe persecution, because they're not afraid. They're not seeking comfort and safety. They're overwhelmed by this burden, this passion that's alive within them, this compulsion to go and make disciples of Jesus. You see the difference? We've been far too comfortable here. Now we think comfort's what we're here for. It's not. We are here to go make disciples of Jesus. So we're not just going, but we're going with purpose. And I want you to see as I conclude here, verses 7 through 11 become very powerful, okay, because it shows us what this whole idea of go with compulsion is. And what we're going to see is that Matthew, he kind of compares two people. At the same time, there are guards who've seen the resurrection, and they now, run into the city with purpose. And there's the women who've seen Jesus in the resurrection, and they now run to go tell the disciples, but they go with purpose. And that's the whole idea. You go with purpose. See, the women are told to go with purpose as they see not only the angel, but they see Jesus is alive. And both times they say, go tell the disciples, this has happened and I am alive. Now you have to remember the women came to the tomb to anoint a dead body. I mean, they literally came to the tomb as people who were crushed. They were lost. They were without hope. They just thought, maybe I can find a little peace, a little comfort by anointing Jesus' body. And yet he says, they get there, and the angel says, he's not here. Go tell the disciples he's alive. And all of a sudden, everything changes for them there. Woo. And they begin to go. And as they start running for the disciples, guess who they run into? Smack dab into Jesus. And they fall down and they worship him. And Jesus says, now you've got to go with purpose and tell my disciples these things. I'm alive. And they take off and they go. Now, how do you think they went? They went there crushed, without hope, lost completely, and all of a sudden Jesus is alive. They've seen him. It's all there. Do you think they walked slowly to go see the disciples? It took the long way around because, got to the door and they were knocked kind of soft. Well, they might be sleeping. Let's maybe come back later and see what happens. Do you think that's what they were like? No way. They ran with everything they had. They got to that door. They probably just about pounded it right off the hinges. And they get in there and they all start talking and say, Jesus is alive. Because they went with what? Purpose. They were compelled. They couldn't help it. Powerful. Exact same time Matthew shows us. Verse 11. There's the guards who were there outside Jesus' tomb. Earthquake, angel, tomb's empty. They pass out. Literally, Matthew tells us they have an earthquake within themselves. They start shaking. He uses the exact same word as earthquake, and they pass out. I think Matthew's awesome doing that kind of stuff. So here they are. They pass out. They wake up, and they go, oh, they've got to go. And that's what it says. Matthew says, and they went into the city, same word, with purpose. What's their purpose? We're in trouble. The person we were guarding here, he's gone, okay? Now, in their day, when you were guarding somebody and they escaped, you took their place. But he was in a tomb. Oh, man. They know they're in trouble. Where do they run? To their boss? No way. They run to the chief priest. They say, well, you got to fix this thing. And what it says is, Matthew tells us, they told everything. Emphatic. Man, there was an angel. There was an earthquake. We cried a little bit. It was horrible. They told it all. They couldn't help it because they were compelled to tell the truth. But they were compelled to stay out of trouble. So what happened? They changed some money, and they say, this is what we're going to do. We're going to come up with a lie. Disciples came and stole the body when you were sleeping. Don't worry about it. 30 years later, understand, 30 years later, Matthew is writing this account for us. And he says they're still out there spreading this lie. 30 years later, 70 years later, Justin Martyr is writing, he says they're still sending people all over the world because by this time Christianity has taken hold all over the known world, and they're sending people out saying, no, this is a lie. He was just stolen by his disciples. This is what the Jewish people were doing. Can you imagine that? Because everything we do when we start moving with purpose has this ripple effect, a powerful ripple effect in all that we do. I mean, just think about the women. They go and share this truth. They create this ripple effect. They tell 11. There's 120 at Pentecost where the Holy Spirit comes and just lights their hearts and their souls on fire, and it burns so powerfully that they have to go out and share. 3,000 are saved that day. They're adding to their numbers every single day. They go out and they literally change the world. Ripple effect because of a couple of ladies who took off with purpose and said, Jesus is alive. Can you imagine that? I guarantee you, we have more than 120 people in this church. We could change the world if we had a passion and a purpose and a compulsion like those ladies. You see what I'm saying? That's the atmosphere and the culture of a church, of who we're called to be. See, we're entering a whole new era in our culture and in the church in America, and we're going to have the emphasis shift to going with purpose, to sharing Jesus, to inviting others to know Jesus. And this is going to have to become our compulsion and our purpose and our motivation in every aspect. And we can have ripple effects, I'm telling you, we can have ripple effects. Because you got to watch out for people with a unity of purpose. When there's a group with a unity of purpose, I'm telling you, with that motivation and compulsion, it's powerful. Differences begin to fall to the wayside. Small things don't matter anymore. My personal preferences don't really matter because what's here for the whole and this purpose is what's really the most important thing. And the mission becomes so important that ripple effects start happening everywhere. You know, Mother Teresa is said to have this quote. She said, I alone cannot change the world, but I can cast a stone across the waters and create many ripples. Can you imagine that? I'm just one person. You can create ripples with who you are and what you do. Would you join me as we continue to create ripples here in this church and in our community, maybe around the world, and just pray and say, Lord, show us where we need this unity of purpose, this shift of emphasis, where we can create this culture and maybe just renew it within my life. Maybe help me remember I was dead and you brought me to life, man. I was in such a bad state, and yet you pour your love, your grace, and everything upon me. You change me, you transform me, and I have to share this with passion, with people, because Jesus can do it for anyone. That's who we are. Go make disciples.